This is an interview with Professor Don Rasmussen for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Orchestra Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. Today is November 16th, 1998. Professor Rasmussen, I want to thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule and welcome to Birmingham and to the Institute.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. Very happy.
Thank you. I just want to start by asking some introductory questions. Where are you from? Where were you born?
Well, I was born near Chicago, in fact, right about where O'Hare Airport is at the present time, and that was 82, next week it will be 82 years ago.
2 years.
And as a child, I used to milk the cows right there where the runways are for O'Hare, and every time I land there, I think about that.
Think about the milking of the cows.
But I spent my early summers with relatives in Wisconsin, milking cows up there. As children on the farm, we had to work, you see. As soon as we were able to sit underneath the cow or cut hay and that sort of thing.
Right.
So I knew a lot of physical labor, and those were also depression times. And so we had to participate in all work activities in order to provide wherewithal for the family.
How many siblings?
I have one sister.
One sister.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your mother and father, are they originally from Chicago?
No, they were from Wisconsin, but where the rest of the relatives, my father came down to near Chicago, a town near O'Hare Airport, where he became a railroad worker and then an engineer on the railroad. So I was kind of raised in a working class area or community, all railroad workers, and my father belonged to the union, and we greatly appreciated that, and we're from the, you'd call it a union family.
Right.
With one exception, that he belonged to the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers.
Yeah.
But even when I was no more than 10 or 11, somehow I learned that the Brotherhood was limited to white people.
Yes.
So I used to ask my father, they called us a Brotherhood. Now, I didn't know a black Britain was. I never knew any black people until I was a student at the University of Illinois many years later. But I still had some kind of political interest. So I used to ask my father, how come they can call that a brotherhood when it was limited to the people who look like you?
At what age were you?
Oh, I was no more than 11 years old.
How did you know that was the case at the time?
Well, my mother and her side of the relation were very conscious of prejudices. And my mother taught me very, very early when I was even much younger that I should be respectful of all people. And I remember a conversation when I was a child. The telephone rang. I was nearby. My mother answered. And I picked it up that he was talking to Mr. Theodosakis, who was a Greek origin, who ran a saloon near the railroad tracks, and he was calling my mother and had given her the message that a dirty Jew had purchased an old brick factory in town where there had been a big hole where they dug out the clay, and he was going to put trash and garbage in there, you see, and cover it up. Well, my mother stopped with Mr. Theodosakis, and she said, Mr. Theodosakis, what did you say? And so Mr. Theodosakis, I think, knew a little bit about my mother, because he said, well, some Jew. No, that isn't what you said, Mr. Theodosakis. What did you say? She was cleaning down, you see. And So finally, my mother got around, asked Mr. Theosakis. She said, "Mr. Theosakis, do you remember what people used to say about the Greeks when they first came to this community?" He knew. Yes, they used to call them dirty Greeks. So now, Mr. Theosakis, I want you to know that next time you ever call me, you better leave that word dirty away from as a reference to anybody. Well, later in life, I got curious about myself. Now, where did I, just the question you asked, where did I pick up my consciousness of these things? And I guess I must have been 7 or 8 years old when I heard my mother tell Mr. Theosakis what to say. And so there it was. Then after that, I gained an early political consciousness. I somehow got onto reading Upton Sinclair. The first book that really changed my life was The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And Sinclair Lewis and that just literature of all kinds. But I was very young.
Yeah. So your family. Well, let me go in this direction. Your mother was very conscious.
Yeah.
So she then, that seemingly was the way in which you became more conscious.
Yeah.
What was the educational level of your mother?
She was a school teacher, but you see, her education to be a school teacher in those days was just really high school.
Right.
Qualified her to do that.
Right.
All of the sisters were teachers also, and all of her brothers were sailors. They sailed around different parts of the country and the world, and they brought back stories about other countries, other peoples, curiosity.
So you always had that discussion in the family then about other places.
But never knowing a black person or a Jew, even for that matter, until I was in the university. And by that time, I had no problem. I never learned racist language, for example, but I was never lectured to. I was never lectured. It was more an example and my reading.
I'm interested to know, though, what was your father's response to the question that you raised with him?
Well, he didn't have any response, really. He just kind of blubbered, and that was just, that's the way it was. You see, well, I kind of let him off the hook. I didn't make any, I didn't kick him in.
Press it at that time.
I didn't press it at that time. And because in other ways, I respected very much my father. He wasn't working then. He very protective of his family and all that sort of thing. So I was very happy to be under his wings, so to speak.
Yes.
And I had security in spite of there being a depression.
Right. What was his educational background?
Oh, he just went through about 3rd, 4th grade, something like that. But you see, in the Depression, we were imbued with the view that education was the only way that we could get out of, I can't say poverty because my family, my father always worked, and we many neighbors were much worse off. But the answer to our problem was education. So by the time I was in 8th grade, well, I had skipped a couple of grades. Teachers promoted me, and so I guess the perversions or distortions in my personality came from being a runt. I was always 2 years younger than all the children like that, all the children like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that meant you was a rather bright student.
I was a good student, yes. I didn't consider myself bright, but I was a good student. But always with the expectation of eventually going to university, except that there was no one in our community who ever did even attend
All
the
right.
university.
Describe your community. What was your community like as you were growing up?
Well, it was a working class little town, 300 people, and well, you see, this was 19 early 20s, you see.
Right.
And so, now for example, I'll give you an example from my father. He took charge of, they put in a water system in the town. And it was, the local policeman was supposed to take care of the pump, but he didn't do a good job, and the whole pump burned out, and nobody had any water in the town.
Mm.
So my father said, well, he'll take care of the water system, and so he did. But I always had to walk for about a mile down to the pumping station, turn the pump on and turn it off at times. But also, on Saturday, he had to paint the water hydrants in town. And so he told me that that was partly my responsibility too. That is, he gave me a bucket of paint and a paintbrush. Again, I was only 10, 12 years old, 12, 13 around that age, not quite 10, 12, 13. And I had my bucket of paint, and on Saturday morning, when a lot of the other kids were playing around football or whatever it was, I had my paintbrush and painting water hydrants. And I wasn't paid either. And when I brought the subject up, you see, well, if I could live in that town, I could do something for it. That was my civic responsibility.
Right.
No more was said. No big lectures or whatnot, but in a sense, too few kids, real young like that, have any responsibility for their community. And so I guess that led a little bit to my activism and so on.
Your elementary school, was it a community school? Was it right near or how?
Yeah, public school, yes.
Did you walk to school?
Oh, yes, sure. Oh, and in high school, I had to walk a mile and a half or a little more, wade through the snow every time. It was a suburb of Chicago.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, and but I guess another thing happened to me. I remember I made friends. I had somehow took up with people that were picked on. Say maybe that had some bearing in their life. I remember that there was a boy in the schoolyard had epilepsy. I don't know, you're leading me into all kinds of subjects that I wasn't thinking about. And fast recollecting. As he had epilepsy, and every once in a while, he had a fit. He'd lie in the schoolyard, he would be kicking and frothing at the mouth and so on. This was before doctors would do anything about things like that. And other kids used to come while he was lying, he was kicking. He was like the chickens in a chicken yard. One of them gets injured and the rest of them come and peck at it and so on, And I used to see that poor boy lying there frothing and in his convulsion, and other children pounding on him, kicking him, so on. And well, I just made it a point that he was going to be my best friend, and we became very close. Or I remember, I'll give you another funny example on that. I remember the elections of 1927. That's before your time. And let's see, 1960, 1927. So I was 11 years old. And I referred to my political consciousness. Well, I was very much interested in the presidential election that time. And I guess Mr. Hoover was running against Al Smith. Al Smith was a Catholic. well, we were Protestants. Means I had to go to the Protestant Sunday school. And so I didn't know many of the Catholics. There weren't very many. There were some. And Al Smith was a Catholic, you see, and the news in our Protestant part of the town was that as soon as was elected, would be elected, he was going to immediately bring the Pope over to the United States. And so on. Well, already at that time, I knew that this was just plain nonsense and insanity. And so I took it on myself, all alone. Nobody ever told me to do it. I looked up a Catholic boy that I knew and lived a couple blocks away. I went over to him. His name was George Muhlenbein. I haven't thought of that for
George was
Muhlenbein's name was. And I knew that his family was Catholic. And so I said to George, George, there's all of this news about the election and the Catholics were going to bring the Pope to the United States. I said, George, I want you to know that I don't believe those stories. That's a lot of nonsense. And I apologize for people talking like that. Well, poor George didn't know what the hell I was talking about. He was also about 11 years old. He was 12 years old. And so, well, I look back at it and I was kind of wondering what kind of a kid was I that but I was
talking about politics at that age. Now, was that due to your family, your mother's discussions around the house?
My mother and and one of her brothers who was a railroad worker in the same town and lived near us, and he had books. He read very widely and very good literature, and he would send me to Chicago to buy books. And of course, I would start reading these things because it would take an hour and a half to go to Chicago to the bookstore. And so I'd read the book all the way back. And so I became familiar with some. I remember, I don't know when Scott Neary wrote The Twilight of Empire, but it was a book in economics.
Right.
And so by the time I was 12, I was very versed in, I had read George Bernard Shaw, his Intelligent Guide to Politics or Socialism, Capitalism, things of that sort. So that's what I mean. I was versed in such concepts of socialism, capitalism, and all the variations and whatnot. So then I went to high school, and by that time I was pretty much a socialist. I had also considered the problem of anarchism and read some literature, Emma Goldman and Kropotkin, some of the anarchist philosophers, you see. And so I read that, and I decided that I was not an anarchist, that I was more a socialist. Mm-hmm. I didn't read Karl Marx. I knew nothing of what you'd call New York socialism. It was pretty much Middle West socialism.
Right.
And that was kind of native and without all of that philosophy.
At this same time, A. Philip Randolph was in Chicago. And he was developing the
sleeping car porters.
Yeah, the sleeping car porters, right. And in fact, in 1925, Chicago was where it originated.
That's right.
Had you been introduced to that? Did you know anything about?
No, I didn't. I wasn't acquainted with that until I got to the university and learned. I had a professor of labor economics at the University of Illinois, and that's when I first learned about A. Philip Randolph, because this professor was a kind of consultant for the sleeping car porters, and he talked about that. My first acquaintance with him. Well, later on, I was very young, you see, so too young to go to the university down in Champaign. So I was sent to a little religious college near Chicago called Elmhurst College. I spent 2 years there where I could live at home. And I was just 15 or 16 when I started.
You started to
do college, yes, there.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple of years of this background, and all of the people there were studying mostly for the ministry. But you see, by that time too, I was sent to Sunday school and dutifully went and so on. But I was beginning to be skeptical, partly because my mother taught the Sunday school, but she just couldn't swallow that story of Jonah and the whale. She just couldn't figure out how he lived in the belly, And so I knew that there was a certain skepticism, you see, and I couldn't figure it out either. I couldn't help my mother. So, but I can't say that I was, even though I had so many doubts about the literal interpretation of the Bible very early, I can't say that I doubted the wisdom of very much of the Bible. I certainly was influenced by it, but I also became very early conscious of a large number of what I guess I shouldn't hesitate to say hypocrites that were folding their hands and praising the Lord and talking about brotherhood, and then on the other hand, weren't practicing it. So I became quite critical of the effectiveness of the organized church, you see. And so anyway, that kind of stuck with me in many ways.
Being 15 when you went into college, what kind of relationships did you develop with
other students? Well, the girls used to pick me up in their arms and hold me like a baby, and so I wasn't eligible for any dance, sports animals. So I never went to a prom. I never did a lot of things that either the high school or the college students were doing. And at the same time, I think I was a very happy child. I don't recall lamenting it or feeling that I was left out. I sort of, on the football team, you see.
I was going to ask you about extracurricular activities.
Yeah,
high school.
Yes, I carried the water bucket for the football team, you see. And sometimes they played in the rain and so on. And I could see I was very happy carrying the water bucket rather than to be out there getting slammed and muddy and so on. And so I didn't miss it. When it came to basketball in high school, I couldn't throw the basket up to the basket, let alone make a point. So, and now, like my brother-in-law was a star football player in high school. I just visited him the other day. He needs to carry around a little stool. He can't walk, but 100 feet, and he has to sit down and so on. And I think to myself, goodness, I'm hiking 15 miles a day and climbing mountains and doing all of these things. And I know some of these old athletes
because he was carrying water when he was out there getting his knees all busted up.
That's exactly right. And so now I don't laugh at it because it's kind of pathetic in a way, but isn't that the way life turns? You never know.
You never know.
That's right.
After your first 2 years at this small college.
Then I went to the University of Illinois.
In Champaign?
Yes. And it was a place that I wanted to go in the first place, but again, I was too young to leave home. And so I went to university. I had very limited funds or expenses. The tuition was $35 a semester.
Exorbitant.
But my family allowed me $2 a week to eat. $2 was a little more than I did today, but I could never eat meat and so on. And but also I learned in the Scandinavian community the value of cooperatives. So I got in a sort of cooperative arrangement with other students. So we cooked together, you see. We lived down a basement in almost a rat hole, you call it. And so we managed to eat all right on $2. And I have to say, later on in graduate school, I was at the University of Illinois for several years, and I never spent any more than that to eat a week. Anyway, at Illinois, when I finally went to Illinois, I was sure that I would find just hundreds of socialist-minded students, and with my community back home. Very early, I just enjoyed Charles Darwin and the Voyage of the Beagle and that, you see. And my Sunday school class, the preacher said, that evolution was really out of the question, and so, all of that. And so I got in terrible arguments all the time, not only with him, but with more relatives and whatnot. But I knew that when I went to the University of Illinois, that would be a given, you see, and as well as running into hundreds of socialists. Well, that dream was very soon shattered. I found the same doubts about evolution, and
very much in the minority.
Students constituted about a couple dozen students out of 15,000. But at the university, you see, I saw and rubbed elbows with the first black person that I ever got to know. And so, let's see. Well, it didn't take long. Well, I did graduate work after my graduation in 1937, and I went to a professor. Yes, I didn't know what to do with depression, a bachelor's degree.
Right. What was your degree?
In sociology. I was first starting in chemistry, but I said to myself, didn't satisfy my political interest. I thought what the world needed was not more chemists, but more people that answer the problems of society. So I thought sociology would give me all the answers.
Right.
Well, I found out that sociology
Right.
some of it didn't have any more answers than the chemists did. But anyway, so let's see,
You said at Illinois, at Champaign, you met the first black student.
Yeah. They sat near me and next to me in class, you see. And I never got to know those particular students at that time. But later in my graduate years, I met more. But I was a graduate student for only 1 year. Then I began teaching an assistant instructor in criminology and penology. Oh yes, I know. I was the professor approached me after my graduation and asked me if I would do research in Joliet Penitentiary in the state. Well, I wasn't even thinking of doing graduate work because I didn't have any money. Plus, my father thought that after 4 years, that's all there was to college. He didn't even know there was any such thing as graduate.
So you were the first to go off to college in your family?
Not only the family, but the whole town. Yeah, so but the professor finally, I said, well, sure, I'll do that. So I went to Joliet Penitentiary to talk to prisoners. So there, I was housed with prison personnel outside of the wall where I slept at night. But early in the morning, I was admitted to the prison and in a sense, through the gates and locked in to a cell block where I spent all day and evenings talking to prisoners.
What were you researching?
I was researching some of their attitudes toward their treatment and especially parole. That was a topic not completely of my own choosing. My mentor in the university helped to choose that topic, but that didn't stop me from talking to prisoners about all different kinds of subjects.
Right.
And
how long were you there?
I was there 3 months at first, and I did it again the next summer, so I spent 6 months at Joliet Penitentiary.
Mm-hmm. What was the makeup of the prison population?
Oh, well, they were mostly white, but there were a number of black people there. And in fact, my barber was black, and he was reputed to be the best burglar ever to come out of the city of Chicago. And I tell you, that's some reputation. And I remember he used to tell me how I could burglarize a house and get away with it, so on. And he was a wonderful man. And I was watching. I could see why he was also an expert burglar because he showed me how to walk. He could glide across this floor 50 miles an hour. I always thought you tiptoe gently on your toes and so on. Oh, no. You walk like this and you glide across the floor and so on, do it in a fast way. So he taught me all the intricacies of burglarizing houses.
I assume you never went into your apprenticeship or anything.
So I had many murder, and in fact, there was one prisoner by the name of Nathan Leopold. He was a famous case in the 1920s. He had was a man by the name of Leopold had murdered a young man. They were students at the University of Chicago, and Clarence Darrow had defended him and so forth. And so Nathan Leopold used to teach me German. He was a student of languages, and he could converse in 27 different languages at the time. And he was still a broad man. So anyway, I had lots of interesting friends in the prison.
What did you finally conclude from that research?
I concluded, that there was no such thing as rehabilitation of prisoners in the prison. Conditions were really inhumane, so inhumane that later on, when I was asked to lecture on conditions, what I saw, what I learned in the prison, I described them, and sometimes I wondered whether the worst people were those who were the guards and protecting us, or the prisoners, because in election time and any change of party, the prisoners even helped to sell every desk in the place and everything that could be moved on the market someplace, and it was pocketed by the people moving out and others coming in. But the inhumane conditions were beyond belief. That was an eye opener, and I talked on that subject, and believe it or not, but the first threat on my life came when I opened up my mouth about that, and that ended in a big controversy with the head of the Department of Public Welfare in the state coming to the university to find out who I was and what the hell I was doing, talking against law and order and all that stuff. And I wasn't talking against law and order. I was all for law and order, but not the law and order that he was responsible for.
So you were teaching?
I was teaching them criminology and penology in the university.
And how did the word get back to? Did you publish any of that?
Some of my speeches were in the newspapers, you see, and they picked it up in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I remember, in one instance. But also, I was broadcasting my lectures in the university, or the university radio station, which covered the city of Chicago. So my mother used to listen to me lecture to my classes in the university. And the other thing about at that time, you see, I started teaching them when I was 21, and only seniors and graduate students could get my class. So all my students, vast majority, were older than I was. So I had a little problem.
Well, what did your mother think of what you were doing?
Well, mother, well, she was, pleased about that. Now, of course, I was getting $70 a month working there in this assistantship. And my father, of course, asked me, I said, well, heavens, it's $70 a month. Why don't you come and work on the railroad? And get a lot more than that. I could probably get you a job switching on the railroad. And then I said, no, I guess I'll stick it out to university. I was already involved in and was working on a PhD. So he said, well, can't you organize a union down there? So I did. Well, a union of college professors and assistants. And
so you did organize the...
No, I tried to. Oh, yes, I put up signs around the university. There were 1,500 faculty members. I put up signs about meeting about the union, and so came tonight for the meeting, and there was one professor and a half a dozen assistants. So I was, by that time, young. This is quite interesting too, because it gets to the race question. I organized, on faculty, I could be responsible for housing undergraduates. So I organized a cooperative, and I could, as a faculty member, I could be in charge and responsible for it. And so we had rented a house and so on. And this house happened to be near a black fraternity. I forgot which one. But that kind of fascinated me a little bit, because I wasn't in the fraternity. And of course, I never would be by outlook, you see.
Right.
So here were these students, and kind of intrigued me. But one day, there was a young man from that fraternity who was being hazed. He knew one of the fellows in our cooperative, and his fraternity brothers were kind of beating up on him, at least enough to scare him, and he took refuge in our apartment. That man turned out to be, his name was Blackwell, I remember it to this day, and he became a rather famous mathematician, and is now living in Berkeley. He became professor of mathematics.
Oh, is that right?
So on in Berkeley, and so I haven't even met him since those days, but I was intrigued by this young man who was seeking refuge from his own brothers there in the Blooming fraternity.
Do you remember what fraternity it was?
No, I don't remember. It's one of those Greek letters.
So there were quite a number of black students then.
Yes, there were. And then I learned that there was no place for them to eat. They
Couldn't eat in the cafeteria.
there wasn't any cafeteria. Well, there was one, but they couldn't eat at the cafeteria, and there was no restaurant in Champaign-Urbana. The nearest restaurant where they could eat was at the Illinois Central Depot, about 2 miles away from the campus. Well, that's what really got me started in what you might call agitation and sit-downs and so on. I might add too that along about this time, I married one of my students. That is the day after final exams. That was in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the two of us lived on the $70 a month. And so she was a participant in all of my activities.
Mm-hmm. Was she local?
No, she was a refugee from Germany. She had escaped from Hitler's Germany when she was 16, made her way to the United States, and had practically no high school. She walked into Columbia University to Nicholas Murray Butler's office. He was president of Columbia, and told him, somehow this was a fluke, you see, because he was a rather anti-Semitic guy. But she walked in his office and told him that she had heard that he had a good university and she would like to attend. And of course, he didn't have any wherewithal to do that. And well, he was rather taken aback and also didn't realize that she was Jewish. And but he talked to her for a little while. He was busy and he sent her to a dean in Tewksbury, and so she went to see him. Well, I guess Dr. Tewksbury, coming from the president, assumed that, well, she was being sent down to him to fix her up with a scholarship, which she got. Mm-hmm. And so she went to Columbia for a semester, learned some English then, and started to study. But that part of the university, there were some radicals on it. Leopold, Morris Mitchell, some other people who had, when I say radical, they were really quite liberal. And there was objection to them by the National Association of Manufacturers. And so that part of the University of Columbia was abolished. Well, she quit Columbia in protest, was sent to the University of Illinois. And there she was kind of rescued by Dr. Sacker, who started Brandeis University later on, but who also started the Foundation. And she was given a job to work in the sorority and help girls with their writing English. But you see, she had just learned English herself. So
why was she sent to Illinois?
But because one of the professors at Columbia said she should experience Middle America. That she had this very distasteful experience at Columbia, and what she ought to do was to get out to the Middle West. Well, she ended up in one of my classes, and we got married the day after final exams.
How long did you know her?
Oh, about 3-4 months, I guess, something like that.
How did your family accept it?
Well, they accepted very readily, yes, except, of course, how are we going to live on $70 a month? This was my father's opinion after, my failure to organize a union and raise the wages and so on. So then...
was your sister younger or older?
She was younger. Yes, in her case, you see, unfortunately, at that time, two boys were sent to college. My parents sent me enough just to squeak by. Of course, girls went to secretary school to learn to type and a big job like that. So, of course, that was discriminatory. that's why when my parents eventually died and left us a house, I said to my sister, it's yours, and every last cent will solve the problem of passing on any property or money or anything if you just keep it and then with that, because you deserve it. You were the one that was cheated, so to speak, in your education. So anyway, that's the way that was. But you see, after my wife came, you see, her family was being systematically gassed and killed. And we used to say what little we could and send packages to the concentration camp, which I guess the Nazis probably opened at 8, but Carl used. So, but she shared in all of my activities. And then came these black students who had no place to eat. So then we used to accompany a black student or two to go in the restaurant and sit down and order something, you see, and there was no service, and there were accidents like spilling, and then there were bouncers at the door so that they could see you coming. And
So were you the only two whites?
no, there were some other white students. I did not originate that activity, but there were some others who were.
Were you the only faculty member?
So far as I know, yes, I was the only faculty member. Yes, and now I guess there were faculty members who certainly approved what I was doing and taking me to it.
Mm-hmm.
And we went on from there to become acquainted with the people in the black community of Champaign-Urbana. I remember some very, very poor women who had a little organization. Somehow or other, my wife established contact with them, and they invited us to join their little monthly get-together where they brought a little food, and they had a topic of discussion, and they prayed a little bit, and those women invited my wife and me to join them. I was the only man. Well, and all of these women were, I don't know that they ever got out of elementary school, but they used to have.
So you were invited to join.
Yeah. Well, I considered it very, very much a privilege and what an education for me. What their problems were and concerns and the degree of their poverty. And I remember also they had great faith in voodoo doctors down in New Orleans. And one time, I remember one of them had a terrible condition of snakes on her skin. They were crawling all over there. So she had to go to the voodoo doctor down in New Orleans.
Was she from New Orleans?
No, but the doctor was there. Go down to New Orleans. Well, the old doctor down there, he couldn't, all he could do was to transfer this condition to somebody who she would recommend, to be somebody that she didn't like, And so she'd come back. Sure enough, her snakes were all gone, but she told a woman down the street what had happened. And so she got the snake, and then she had to go to New Orleans. I remember this story of these women. Of course, I never attempted to argue or say, well, you should have gone to somebody else and so on. And based on all seriousness, listen to these things that plus the whole feeling about those women and their struggles, you see. And so I got my finger on the pulse of another part of society that I had never experienced.
What other kind of issues did they raise?
Well, there were issues. The principal one was the care of their babysitter children and their health problems, many. But then getting problems with getting along, looking for jobs.
Right. You were a professor, instructor of sociology at the time.
Yes, I from criminology and penology, I moved more to sociology and introductory sociology, and I had at $70 a month. I had more students in my classes than any other member of the sociology department, and my students were mostly seniors and graduate students. So my $70 looked smaller and smaller the longer I was there.
Yeah. Did you ever encounter any black students in your classes?
Yes, not very many. Not very many. So I don't remember being, particularly friendly or any different from the other students.
So how long did you remain there?
4 years teaching there. Then I moved on to Michigan, to a university, Central Michigan University, where I then was kind of on my own and was an assistant professor. And I had 5 classes that I had never taught before, 2 of them in economics, about 50 students in each class. And it was kind of an overwhelming job.
Why did you leave Illinois?
Well, I was just an assistant instructor, and it was time to, I had looked for, there were opportunities that came along. For example, I remember one of them was from a college in Missouri. There was an opening in sociology and I had all the qualifications. But I had my own qualifications, and I wrote to them that if I came to work for them, they could rest assured that I was very much interested in the race problem of the United States, and I wasn't about to put up with segregation or, essentially racism. And if they were satisfied with that position of mine, I would consider their job. Well, you can imagine the response that I got. And so,
what was the response?
Oh, they would think of hiring me. So
you did get a response.
Yes, oh yes, I was notified that somebody else had been selected. So, well, they more qualified and so on. It may very well be. I just don't know anything about that. And so I was glad that they didn't hire me anyway, because hell, I didn't want to spend my time around people unacceptable like that.
Did you do that? You write that letter because it was in Missouri?
Yes, and that's right. It was sort of on the line there. Right. I've forgotten it. Hopefully, like Drew, or I don't remember the name of the college. I guess maybe there's a Freudian English of some sort. But.
Right. So then, is that when you then took the position at Central Michigan University?
Yes, that was just an opening, and of course my salary jumped to I forgot what, $3,000 or something. That's unheard of amount of money. I guess I was going after the money. But anyway, while we were there, an opening came at Talladega College in Alabama. Well, I'd never heard of Talladega, never dreamed about going to the South, except that I was notified about the opening from the University of Illinois. And so, and I was also in that announcement or so, it was clear that this was a student, and this was a college for black students. Well, having been in these activities at Illinois involving black students and eating and so on, there were some more things that we did at Illinois too that I haven't talked about. But so my wife, when she landed in this country, had a job at the Church of the Master in New York with the Reverend Robinson. He was at that time very well known, very popular, and very widely known black minister, and a wonderful, wonderful man. And my wife worked in the Sunday school, first arriving in this country. And so we conferred with Reverend Robinson about the place Talladega. And Reverend Robinson said, well, that was a wonderful school. We had an opportunity to go there. That would be very good. And so following that, we wrote to Talladega and made an application. The president of Talladega was Buell Gallagher at the time. And one day we were,
Was Gallagher white?
he was white. And he was at the time of his appointment, was the youngest college president in the United States. We got a note from him saying he was arriving in this town that we were living in Michigan, and he would like to talk to us about the position in Talladega. So he arrived, and we were a little bit surprised with the president coming to see us and so on. And he arrived, and we spent the afternoon, 2-3 hours chatting. And they described somewhat the situation, and he described a very strong stand at Talladega College against segregation.
Like what?
Well, for example, I'll tell you, even extreme. You know, the college choir in those early years would not sing a spiritual. Yeah. Why? Because the Fisk Jubilee singers were traipsing all over the country, singing spirituals for those nice white folks, kind of entertaining them and getting money.
Right.
And this was a kind of degradation, you might say, that Talladega was not going to do that same thing.
Mm.
So,
whose decision was that? Was that?
well, I don't know where that started, but that was the existence. So it was not until long after the war that I heard my first spiritual sung by the choir at Talladega College.
Mm-hmm.
And well, you see, by that time, I had assumed a somewhat militant attitude toward this whole issue. And so I liked all that, you see. And it was also explained that when we went off the campus, white people were not assumed to avail themselves of segregated conditions, you see, such as going to a restaurant or going to a movie, we'll say, and sitting downstairs while blacks sat upstairs.
What were you to do? Not
go
at all.
That. Yeah. And so I have to say, for the 10, 13 years that I lived in Alabama, I don't think I can recall. I never went to a white restaurant. I went hungry or I wouldn't eat.
Mm.
I could always go to the grocery store and find the makings of a sandwich or something and eat.
What was the makeup of the faculty?
I think there were about in the neighborhood of 8 white people on the faculty. I would say about a third of the faculty worked in the neighborhood.
What was the reception that you received from other faculty members, black faculty members at that time?
Oh, that was very cordial. Yeah, there, we were just one, and yeah, no problems of that sort. And so anyway, see, Gallagher wanted to talk to my wife too to make sure, because it certainly wouldn't do for one to come there and then disagree over these kinds of policies. And so finding that we were agreed and so on, and realized a little bit of the situation, he was satisfied, and so we went to Talladega. Penniless, I tell you, we had absolutely nothing. We met us at the railroad station in Sylacauga, and we had everything we owned in the suitcase, and we had the baby beside with us. We didn't have a bed when we arrived, and so we were sleeping on the floor for the first couple of months. And I had hardly any clothes. I just had a suit and a couple of clothes. And so, so in a new position like that, where I was very, very busy with classes and strange situation, and here I had the responsibility for all of sociology and so forth, and so I was very busy. It wasn't until Thanksgiving time had any time to go away, leave the campus. So, but in the meantime, too, sometime in September, we were all ready, and we had been members of the NAACP before we came, so we were in Alabama too. And incidentally, I learned, somebody told me later that we were the only white people in the NAACP at that time.
This is 1942.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if that's true, and it doesn't make any difference one way or another. But anyway, Thanksgiving was the first opportunity to get away from the campus. Mm-hmm. So we were looking forward to going to Birmingham to do some shopping. And so we brought with us two students. One of them, a young man from Pittsburgh, I forgot his first name, Pangburn, and another student, his girlfriend, Edith Barnett, who was the granddaughter of Etta Moulton, the singer. So they came with us to Birmingham. Oh yeah, I was telling you that in September, my wife went to an NAACP meeting in Atlanta. While she was there, she met a young man by the name of Louis Burnham. Louis was the executive secretary of the Southern Negro Youth Congress. And Laura was struck by his attractiveness. He was very articulate and very nice. And we told my wife that, well, whenever you're in Birmingham, come to visit us at the office and you tell us about their work. So we were youth Congress. So that's about all we knew. And it's at the Masonic Temple building, actually, at that. So we set off on our shopping expedition. We left the car with Mr. Pangburn, and but not then we left the car. That was a little later. We did our shopping at Sears Roebuck. That was thought we did a good bargain there. Bought a suit, and it took quite a while to do that. So it was in the middle of the afternoon, and we got eventually to drop by Mr. Burns' office at the Masonic Temple building. Well, we met him. I knew nothing about him except what my wife said. And but we hadn't eaten all day. Especially we wouldn't eat any food, no place to eat. And we were going to go back to Talladega, but we were quite hungry by late afternoon. So we said to Burnham, well, maybe we can eat someplace and talk at the same time because we're hungry and we want to go back to Talladega. So I'd heard about a place that might be possible at Nancy's Cafe, a little bit down the street from the Masonic Temple building.
In the 4th Avenue district?
Yeah. Yeah, just half a block from the Masonic Temple. And so Mr. Burnham said, well, actually, if Nancy, I guess it must have been who was in charge or owned it, and he asked Nancy, and well, that was all right. Come in there in this integration group, you see. So we walked over to Nancy's Cafe, and we took seats. There were 3 or 4 customers. We took seats near the rear of the restaurant because it was somewhat unobtrusive, and secondly because we could hear better. We were wanting to talk and avoid any noise. So we were talking and having a supper, and we looked up and here were a couple of policemen, So they didn't hesitate to introduce themselves, and they asked me, what color are you? So I looked at my skin, it looked white to me, and so I showed it to them. So they didn't hesitate to say, well, you come with us. So out to the squad car, and we all got a ride to it was a precinct house. There's some little police headquarters nearby. And there we were kind of booked. And,
Arrested? Arrested?
Oh, yes. Under arrest.
What was the charge?
There were 2 charges. One was inciting to riot, and the other was operating a restaurant which did not segregate the races with an 8-foot wall.
Operating?
Yes, we weren't exactly operating the restaurant, but that didn't make any difference, you see. And so, then there was a little van nearby. So after we were booked, we were led to this police van. The door in the back of it was open, and one of the policemen, we were literally surrounded by them there. And the policeman said, gentlemen, get in. So Mr. Burnham was standing right by the door, you see, so he started to get in the van. The policeman grabbed him by his neck and spun him around and threw him on the ground. He said, I said gentlemen, I didn't say boy. So, boy, that set a tone for what was happening. So then he beckoned to me. I get in. So I got in. And then they put my wife up with the driver. There were another policeman, so there were 2 of them and the driver. Then there was a compartment in that van shaped exactly like a human body. It was shaped, just so Mr. Burnham could fit in there, but not move. They clamped the door shut on him.
And they arrested him as well.
Oh, yeah. And also they arrested Nancy. See, no, I didn't know anything. I never saw them. But so there we were, and there were 2 drunks in the back with me. So when they're driving through Birmingham, you see, every time they slow down, we'd all slide to, I forgot the front or the back, and then we'd speed up and we'd slide the other way. And so then, I was trying to keep track of where they were taking us. I was in a little bar window in the back, you see, and I was trying to keep track because I had no idea where the hell we were going, or they were going to take us out in the woods, or what the hell would happen to us. And also, I was very concerned about Louis Burnham because I just assumed from the beginning that well, maybe they wouldn't harm us, but they might just pick on him and terrible things. I wanted to keep track of they let him out or anyway, whatever I could see.
Yeah.
So, but what I saw was a great big gate closing behind us, and we were in some kind of a prison, and it was toward the edge of town someplace. I have no idea. I don't know to this day where the heck it was, but anyway, they separated the three of us. And as I learned later, they put my wife in a cell with a bunch of women. And those women, as soon as she was locked up, my wife, they rushed to her to smell her breath. And they said, "Sober, how did you get in here?" So she explained to them that she was eating in a black restaurant and with a black person. Well, my Lord, see, all these women were in for mostly prostitution.
These are white women.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Now, what happened to Nancy?
Well, I'll get to that later, see, but all those women put my wife in a corner. They were segregating her. They wouldn't have anything to do with getting near her, you know, for committing this big crime of eating with a black person. And, yeah, so, well, Nancy, I don't think was taken to jail.
Oh,
She had a business there, you see, and I think that was satisfying to the police and so I don't think she was in the jail at all.
They knew how to find her.
Yeah, they put me in a big cell with must have been about 20 guys in there. Terrible. Bugs crawling around on the floor. I had to hold my feet up because things were coming at me. You know, I guess they smelled some fresh meat or something like that. And so on. Should I tell you all more details about all that?
Sure. Just,
well, so there were a bunch of guys in there talking about what they had stolen. A bunch of guys were talking. See, the more they stole, the bigger the story, the more prestige they got. I think something like that. And whatever young guy sitting there too, soaking it in, and I guess envious of those that had stolen more. So there I sat in my finery, and the mattresses were just so filthy, and most of the beds didn't even have mattresses on them. They were like double bunks. Well, after a couple of hours, I was called out and led to a little cell. It was a room not much larger than this that we're sitting in, 8 by 10, 10 by 10, something like that. And there were two policemen. There was a chair in the middle of that room, and two policemen with clubs, and my wife sitting in a corner. I could tell that they had been talking to her and that she had been crying. So that gave me a little thrill. And I learned later, you see, that they thought she was a German spy. And she was having enough trouble in this country among blacks, so that, part of the war. But she convinced them that she was a refugee. Well, there was a bail on both of us, but when it became very sympathetic for this poor white girl that was led astray by this evil husband of hers, so they did away with her bail and double mine, let's see. And so then they started grilling me. I sit in a chair in the middle, and one policeman in front with his club and the other behind. And so then they began to question me. Well, so it went on for, I guess, the neighborhood of 40, 45 minutes at least. I don't remember all the stuff, but they asked me, how'd you get this way?
Yeah.
So I told them, well, I went to school, I went to university, and I guess maybe that had there's nothing there.
So how did you get out? You posted your own bail?
No. Let me just finish that grilling because you see they asked. Oh,
I'm sorry. What?
you know, well, they asked other questions, you know, like to quote them, would you marry a Negra? They use Negra rather than nigger, and I couldn't tell whether that was an accommodation to me or not. It was just kind of a halfway.
That's a little bit more sophisticated than niggers.
Yeah, that's right, and it had a kind of a special importance to me at that time because I knew that I had been a professor and so on, and I thought, well, that's kind of that makes a difference in their possible treatment of me. So he asked me that question, and I said, well, you can see that I'm already married. You're not suggesting that I'd be a bigamist, do you? You know, that made them mad. They raised their club like they're going to hit me. In fact, they come down with their club, except they bent them so they wouldn't hit me. And well, that also clued me in a little bit. They gave me a little more, to be, I'll take them too seriously.
Yeah. They were going to be cautious as well.
Yeah. So, and then would I let my son marry? Well, I said I just didn't believe in parents choosing their son's wives. So I guess that's just not a very good question. Oh, and then that again, they did that same thing.
Never did hit you.
They never hit me. And I don't think if they hit me, I wouldn't have felt it. Honestly, I thought about this, and I thought about it then, and even since about it. Now, for some reason, I felt that I wouldn't even feel it. I was, kind of mad or something. But anyway, the interesting thing was this.
Is your wife still in that same
Yeah,
room?
she's sitting there watching all of this, you see. And here's something else important. Up in the corner of this room was an opening about so long and so high. It was for ventilation. It was just a solid concrete room. It was for ventilation. Sitting on the other side of that hole on a bench was an associate of Louis Burnham's, a black person who was listening to this whole episode, all of this grilling. And so that,
with their knowledge?
well, they didn't realize it, I think.
Okay.
He just happened to be sitting there.
And this was
It was a hallway. There was a bench along the hallway. And this is just an accident. So that he happened to be under there listening to all of this, you see. Well, that was of some importance because by the time we got out of the jail, the word had spread, even as far as Talladega, that we weren't the people to wilt under the threats of these policemen. And so that when we eventually got to Talladega the next day, we had visitors that came to see us in the sense to pay their respects, these were people that they may have had some doubts about the sincerity of people until they heard otherwise, and so they even came to.
Who were these people?
These are people from town as well as at the college. Now, the people at the college would meet in ordinary intercourse there, but even people in town had heard about it and came. But anyway, that's getting into the story. So, but a man, a dentist, I think he was, came. Well, Mr. Penguin, one of the students, came to the jail, wanted to know, he posed as our chauffeur, wanted to know how we, what to do with the car. So I told him, you get Dr. Gallagher from the college and inform him where we are, first thing to do, and just take care of the car. And so that's what he did, and went his way. The next thing we knew, it was already morning or daylight, and we were summoned again to the office, and a dentist, a black dentist from the Masonic Temple building, had come and made bail for us. I didn't learn until later that he was kind of, on the verge of making a song and dance for these guys, along with, kind of making excuses for people don't know what they're doing. Even this kind of language, which I didn't exactly like or appreciate. But I didn't know it at the time. Otherwise, I swear we would have stayed in the place. I don't want anybody to be doing it for me. But anyway, that happened, and we got out.
So what happened to Birmingham?
Yes, well, that was my biggest concern. They released him at the same time, and they did not mistreat him, by any beating or.
He had been interrogated.
Yes, they interrogated him, but I think they already knew.
They knew him.
Yes,
Yeah.
As a local, and I think they pretty much put the blame on us, as though we had kind of imposed ourselves on local people, and so we were pretty much the culprits, which of course was a good thing because I had a big concern at that time. I pictured them beating the hell out of him,
right.
And that was, I was worried about it, but and very happy to see him when we saw him.
So that was your welcome to Birmingham.
That was the welcome to Birmingham. That was followed a few days later by a trial, and we could find no lawyer in the state of Alabama who would protect us. Mm-hmm. Louis was protected by his attorney Arthur Shores, mm-hmm. as attorney, and we paid the fine. We could have appealed and all of that, but
why didn't Shores represent you?
Oh, well, I guess he perhaps even for him that might not have been the thing to do. And
a black man representing.
But the president of the Bar Association of the state of Alabama was under the table talking to Dr. Gallagher, giving him advice on what we should do. But even he could not afford to take our case. The Civil Liberties Union wanted to take it up as an infringement of our rights. Mm-hmm. But there had just at that time been a shooting in Talladega through Dr. Gallagher's window because he and I don't think there were any more whites, belonged to Men's Civic League. These were people from town, men, back in those days, men from town, black men, only. The two of us had forced the hiring of black women in a defense industry, making bags, powder bags in Talladega. And this aroused some opposition and eventually resulted in shooting through Dr. Gallagher's windows.
You and Gallagher were members of the Black Business?
Yeah.
Civic?
We call it Civic League.
Right. Yeah.
We had regular meetings and most often over what to do about the overcrowded cemetery in town, but there was how to get in the vault and all these real real civil rights questions,
And that,
how to put chains around people and drag them to the polls. You know, it was hard in those days. How to raise money for the poll tax and this sort of thing. So, see, I always want to include this kind of information for the history of the civil rights movement. It didn't start just with Rosa Parks not moving back in the bus. This had been going on, and if it went on in Talladega, it was going on in hundreds of towns in the South.
did you have any relationship with other schools?
Oh, well, this came a few years later. We had in 1947 a civil rights organization, a student conference on civil rights held in Talladega, Alabama in 1947 with representatives from every single college in Alabama, including black and white. So this conference right now is not the first one, you know, on civil rights.
In 1947.
That's right, during the Dixiecrat Convention.
Right.
And
And you were leading on Talladega's
campus, and it was a 3-day
white
conference,
students and black
white
students.
and black students, and culminating in a big dance at the assembly hall, in the gymnasium at Talladega. And in the middle of that dance, the sky lit up, and there was a nice cross in front of it, set by some culprits from town. We put the fire out. They had used burlap to put on these 2x4s, which had made it. I dragged that cross home, and I mounted it on the wall of my living room. So for years, I had this wonderful memento of that occasion, as well as a conversation piece, and it was a beautiful thing. And so, yes, I learned later on the young people who said it regretted it. They said it was the dumbest thing they ever did in their lives, and they were so scared when they did it. But you see, at the time, those there were even students at Talladega who went home. They were not going to be there for the consequences of the revolution and so on. But that was 1947. See, so again, civil rights activity in the 40s. There was lots of it, but nobody could talk about it. You see, it was all underground. Any white person, Birmingham or wherever, said something about it, that was the end of his job, or the security, or his parents would throw him out of the family, that sort of thing. And for blacks, it was even worse in a way. That they did more than just thrown out of something or denied a job. And so this is all underground, and it's my aim with this museum or this institute to try to do what I can to get these stories while they're still available. You see, I'm now 82, and it's my contemporaries who have these stories. And we are very rapidly passing away from the scene.
Yes.
And so it's very important to not just to wait for people to come to you with stories. We've got to go out and find these people and get their stories. And that's what I want to participate in.
And you've been doing that, right? You have interviewed.
Yes, I've written my own accounts of this. The memory I have, and different protests. For example, protesting the Dixiecrat Convention, I carried an equality sign right by the doors in front of that convention when it was here in town. Until the crowd had us, there were 7 of us, had us hemmed in so close, there was no escape. So just before we figured they'd close in, we got out of there. And again, I didn't suffer any consequences. But you see, if I pick up all these stories in Talladega, you know, I know that this happened in Anniston and happened in other towns, and so we gotta get this to complete history.
Right. I noticed here you have in your table of contents, chapter entitled "Dinner Together at Dorothy Hall."
Well, I've forgotten the exact year, maybe close to 1949, 50. Dr. E. Franklin Fraser came to Talladega to speak. And that was a great event for me. I was a fellow sociologist, and I greatly admired his writing and used his book in class and so on. It was the occasion for us to talk about the Negro family and so on.
Bourgeoisie.
Yeah, that was later. That wasn't published at that time yet. But he was there, and then he was going on to Tuskegee. So I volunteered to drive him down there. I also thought, well, he was sitting in the front seat with me. There was the back seat. And so at least 2 or 3 of my students could sit there and absorb the conversation and also have a time to be with Dr. Fraser. And so we went to Tuskegee. Outside of Tuskegee, a few miles, we stopped, and Dr. Fraser called up, and we were arriving just late afternoon, time for supper, dinner, whatever you call it. And he was making arrangements for us to eat. So I gave him my name. Well, I guess the name meant something. I kind of learned later, because when we arrived, they were all set to put me in the white waiting room, and the rest of them were going to eat in the black waiting room. But
This is where now?
in Dorothy Hall at Tuskegee Institute.
Yes.
Yes. So
what is the white waiting room?
that was upstairs.
In Dorothy Hall.
In Dorothy Hall, yeah, completely separated from the black one.
Yes.
Well, it didn't take long to tell them that I wasn't going to eat under those circumstances. Mm-hmm. And so, they were taken a little aback. Dr. Fraser disappeared. I think he had some friends or family or something in Tuskegee, so he wasn't a part of this scene. But I was left there with my students, the 3 of them and myself. And so I said I was not going to eat unless I was eating with my students. Well, the dining room for the black dining room was downstairs in a much more conspicuous place. So if I ate down there, it might be seen by lots of people. And I guess that would be against the law in the town or whatever, at least it was at the Institute. And so that was impossible for me in any circumstance there. So I was all prepared. It wouldn't be the first time to just skip it. No. Well, they were, I even felt sorry for them. And I didn't mean to, make them feel badly.
Put them on the spot, right?
Yeah, so finally the settlement was, well, would you eat upstairs with your students? So that was a kind of compromise. And so I said, well, yes, we would. So my 3 students and I had our own private dining room upstairs, and they served us there, and we ate our supper. And so I just thought I'd save that story because, Tuskegee was in another part of the state, and, they were not in a position to do anything they wanted. was. I knew where their hearts were, what they wanted to do, but kind of let them off the hook.
Right.
Who was Mr. Woods that we met? We meet Mr. Woods.
Well, Mr. Woods, Mr. Woods was the first white man living in Talladega that I ever met on a kind of social basis. And I wrote a story about him because it shows again something of the violence, the cruelty, how terrible this system of segregation was, and what some white people do to rationalize it. My wife and I went to Aniston to buy a washing machine. And there was a white salesman there who sold it to us. So we had the washing machine home for about a month. And there was a knock on the door one afternoon, late afternoon, and there was a salesman who sold us a washing machine, and he wanted to know how it was working. Well, hell, we had only used it about twice, and so I told him so that it was working fine. We only used it twice, but working fine. We were very happy with it. So, okay, and he went his way. Another month or two later, he was back. Another knock on the door. How's the washing machine? Oh, I thought, my God, this is awfully attentive, such service, you know. Then it occurred to me also that he's really there for some other reason. So my wife and I were drinking coffee in the back porch. It was a nice summer evening, and so I asked him if he'd like to come back and have coffee with us. So he did. He was ready to do that. And he sat down. It didn't take long for him to kind of pour out his heart. He explained to us that he was a resident in Talladega itself. And but he was anxious to know some people on the campus, and he thanked us for the opportunity to speak. And then he explained, he said, and then he traced some of his history. He said that when he was a small child, he was standing on the square downtown, and he witnessed a lynching. There was a black man who was accused of raping a white woman, and they tied him by his legs to a mule and wagon, and they dragged him around the square until he died. And while he was being dragged around, he was screaming all of the time. He said he knew that this man had never committed that crime. He said there was a second incident in his youth. He and another white boy caught a young Negro boy, and for the hell of it, they had pliers and they pulled his black kid's teeth out because they hear him scream. I know it sounds impossible, but that's what happened. But he said, and that kid was screaming all the time, you can imagine. He said, after that, he couldn't get these screams out of his mind. He kept hearing them all the time. The two screams. Kept screaming and screaming until he couldn't stand it anymore. He had to leave town. So he went to Hollywood, and he got big parts in acting. Played in 26 movies, just not big roles, but little roles, which I guess in itself is kind of a success, you know. But anyway, and that was some years that he was in Hollywood. But he was kind of, never forgot his home in Talladega, and he was lured back. He wanted to go back. And in spite of it, I guess he stopped hearing the screams anymore. I remember he said he stopped in Pittsburgh for a couple of years on the way back, still debating, but eventually he came back to Talladega. And I think through his family, he inherited a big house there in town. And then he got a job up in Anniston, about 25 miles away, being a salesman for Sears Roebuck. So, but when he got back to Talladega, the first thing he did was to look up that boy, now a man, whose teeth he had pulled out. And what did he do? He bought him a new set of false teeth. Like that was the first thing. You can see how magnanimous, but also saddening his conscience. You see, the next thing he did, he hired a very elderly black man to be what he called his yard boy. And I forgot that black man's name. Anyway, every morning, as soon as the black man came to work on the yard, Mr. Woods would set the table for breakfast. And he would call to this black man to come in and eat. It's time for breakfast. And this man would say, boss, I'm not hungry. I had my breakfast. I didn't ask you whether you had your breakfast or not. It's time to eat. Come in here and eat. Mm-hmm. So that poor old man had to come and sit down at the table, and Mr. Woods would serve him and have his own plate, put the eggs on there too, and they would sit across one another and eat their ham and eggs and stuff in the morning. Mm-hmm. See, now it sounds so crazy, but you know, that's what he was doing to take care of his torture. Take care of, he was tortured by these early experiences, you see.
And this was his device to soothe.
That's right. And the other device was to come to the campus and find somebody like myself and my wife to pour out his life and so on, and just something. Well, he came back several times. He was also a heavy drinker, and I witnessed him drink most of a bottle of vodka with one gurgle. And his wife shared his drinking too. So I left town. We went on to live in Pennsylvania later. So I don't know, I just assumed he died of alcoholism. He had to. But anyway, one night he came in all bloody. His shirt was running with blood, and
to your house,
to our house. It was late in the evening. Oh, Mr. Woods, what had happened to you? Well, he'd been in Birmingham to buy some booze, and made that trip rather frequently. And just at the county line, Jefferson County line, there were a lot of little taverns like where you could buy foods, and
Talladega was
dry. Yeah, so we always had to get liquor in Jefferson County and just haul it over the line. See, but right by the border were these little taverns where you could make up your mind to buy it before you got over the line. So he had stopped in one of these little places, and there were 3 black musicians in there playing music for the entertainment. And he knew personally a couple of these men playing in his little band, and he went up to them and shook their hands. And this was in front of all whites in there, drinking and listening and so on. Well, they all stood up and they got a hold of Mr. Woods and they pounded the daylights out of him, and blooding him up terribly. So he gets in his car. They didn't kill him. They let him get in his car, and away he went, and straight to our house. So, we got the swabs out and washcloth and so on, and mopped him off and got the blood off his face, and so I couldn't wash his clothes and go home like that. But anyway, to soothe him and minister to him a little bit, and so on. Well, what did I learn from him? He wanted to come back to the campus, but he was always so kind of half drunk at least, and this wasn't he wasn't the kind of white person that I wanted. But I asked him if we could come to his house. That's right. I took a couple of black family members with me to his house to visit a couple of times. So we had little mild party, it wasn't anything raucous or so. We were very calm kind of thing and so on. So he actually did entertain some black members of the faculty along with myself. And so, as I said, when we left Talladega, this was just at the time that we were leaving. And so but I did meet one white person from Talladega on a personal basis, and that was Mr. Woods. And now you know the story.
Let me ask you about one other story, and I'm going to conclude. I'm very interested. You say here, I became a Pan-African. What do you mean?
Well, yes, that occurred shortly after the war, in 1947, 46, 47. There came to the campus a man from Ghana. Oh, no, I forgot his name, but I would think of it maybe. So it happened to you. And Ghana, he came through the country wanting to interview black people about Africa. At that time, the settlement of the war everything hadn't been settled, and he thought that with the victory of the Allies, blacks in America would have a great deal to say about about affairs in Africa in the settlement of the war, colonies, etc. And so he was here to kind of stop here and there in colleges and question people about what do you think of Africa and so on. And so he came to me, I guess, a sociologist and so on, and maybe inquired around. And so I said, well, it's just wonderful. And since he was from Africa itself, I was always anxious to talk to or meet anybody from Africa, as far as that's concerned, any old place, and learn from them. Well, so I said, well, I'll be very happy for you to use my house, and every evening I'll invite 6, 8, 10 students over, and you can question them about Africa and see what they think. Well, at that time, the independence of India was very much in the news in foreign affairs, and I had my students studying that independent struggle of Gandhi and Nehru in India, and they were well informed about that. Now came Africa, though. And so this man, he asked the students about India, and he could see they were all for the independence of India. So he was very clever, you see, what the conversation around now in Africa. And what do you think about Africa? Well, of course, Africa was kind of filled with savages, and they weren't ready for any kind of independence. And so, I was so embarrassed, but of course I had to shut up and let this go on. And I was so embarrassed by what those students said and thought about Africa. This went on for 3 evenings, and it was the same thing. And I really suffered. So I vowed no student would get out of Talladega with that kind of ignorance about the situation in Africa. So I immediately, after I got books by Du Bois and other articles and so on that I could find about Africa and Kumla, there was struggles you see in Ghana and Nigeria, Lumumba, I guess at that time. Well, anyway, whatever was going on in Africa, and I saw to it that the students were informed and so on. And so, but then I just mainly through the Du Bois, I could see that there was some association between what was happening in Africa and what was happening in the United States, that in the struggle for freedom here. And well, to make all of this short, I assume in answer to the question about segregation, for example, my answer began with, well, I think that the independence of people in Africa and the segregation of black people in this country will come at about the same time. It doesn't mean that, a few years here and there, but in general, that would happen, and I believed it, and I still believe it, that what happened in Africa was independence and so on.
And what's happening about the same time? Ghana 57.
Well, that's right.
Nigeria 60.
That's right, and I think that is partly the great insight of somebody like W.B. Du Bois, and why I think he is just one of the greatest thinkers and historians and social philosophers in American history. And so I became, along with him, kind of. And I had one other experience, because from Talladega, I went. So, as a consequence of that display of ignorance on the part of my students about Africa, I decided that maybe I could organize an African Institute, African American Institute in the United States, an institution that would collect information about Africa, good information, and dispense it all over this country about Africa, especially in the black communities, black colleges, and the other way around to inform Africans about the state of affairs here. And so it's a kind of dream, and then I made a journey to see Dr. Horace Mann Bond at Lincoln University to discuss this. And I did. I went there, met with him, and he was very kind, gracious, and talking to me. And he told me that, well, if I wanted any kind of money, there was a man, Melville Herskowitz, professor of anthropology at Northwestern University, who really controlled the money. I wouldn't get anything unless he put his blessing on it, so you might say. So he went to, so I said, well, I guess I have to go to Northwestern then. So I got myself a scholarship to attend an institute on Africa that was held in the summertime. Off I went to Northwestern. My parents lived near town, northwest of Chicago, and I had no car, so I could travel to Northwestern and live at home. But there were 5 black students from Africa in that study group or program they had there for the summer, and there were about 5 Black American students, and then the rest were white from the United States. Well, it didn't take long before I became very unhappy with the studies. There was anthropology, there was politics, and there was history, especially in the politics. I could see that there was a political viewpoint dominating this institute that I just didn't like. And that was that our main purpose in Africa was to counteract the Russians. You know, the Russians were coming to Africa, and whatever they did, we should do the opposite, you might say.
Well, African students saying
They were a minority of 5 that were clearly against that policy. And then there was myself. And you know that as time went on, there were 6 of us on one side. And unfortunately, a lot of the Black American students there were looking for jobs in the State Department, and they weren't about to make any protest. And the poor African students would, they couldn't protest because they were foreigners. But as soon as class was over, they would get out in the hall and start talking among themselves and just enraged at some of the things that they heard. And so I joined them, so on. There was another thing that happened. The closest to Northwestern University that a Black student could eat was in Rogers Park in Chicago. And so that was a little surprise for me, because I thought I was, up north there, and a lot of intelligent people, educated people. So I couldn't stand that. However, I was not eating. I had to eat out of the brown bag because that's all I could afford. I couldn't afford to go to a restaurant any place, and with my transportation. Plus, I had another thing. I was enrolled full time at Northwestern, and on the GI Bill, I was enrolled full time at the University of Illinois, which was 125 miles downstate. So being enrolled in 2 universities at the same time put a little pressure on my time, you see. So I didn't have time to lead or to organize any protest for that pattern of eating at Northwestern University.
You became a Pan-Africanist basically in lieu of the positions that were being taken.
Yes, I
on
was
issues that were related
I
to
was
Africa.
certainly for the United States doing things in Africa and helping Africans and so on. The Russians did some things right and some things wrong. That was
Just how America did something right and something
That's right.
wrong.
But I was not letting the Russians decide what was right and wrong and then doing the opposite. I was for making up our own mind what was right and wrong, and damn, these people were so imbued with the Cold War spirit at that time that already it was just shortly after the war. They were already imbued with that Cold War business. See, and so that's the way I got to be Pan-African. I decided, well, I'm just like these Africans. That's it.
Yeah. We could spend probably a week talking because you have so many interesting topics. So what we'll have to do is to get you back here sometime, and we'll do this again.
I'd love to come back, and I hope I have one priority, and that is when my wife was injured in a serious accident, and I'm responsible for her care. So I'm kind of on vacation. My children take care of her for 3 to 4 weeks once a year, and it frees me to travel. And instead of being in Nepal or someplace hiking or climbing, which I love to do and have done in past years, this year I decided to come back to visit old acquaintances and friends in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Illinois, and Alabama. And so this is part of my vacation. But my priority is to take care of my wife, and I can't quite predict exactly what all that year involves. But after that, my second priority is going to be to cooperate with the museum here. I have in 1947 and 8, I was curious about the white people in Birmingham. In fact, in the South, but I wanted to get more acquainted with their thinking. So I decided on a project to find white people in Birmingham who would tell me that they were against and thought the system of segregation was stupid and should be done away with. And I wanted to find out what led these people to get this idea. You know, was it travel? Was it the war? Was it looking at reading books or what? And kind of a study in the sociology of knowledge. And so I located, I finally got the biographies of 50-some people. I had 100 people too, and I never had one person who ever refused to divulge their views to me or to give me their biographies. And I collected those. They're each 3, 4, 5 single-space typewritten pages of their lives and their views. And I've sat on that for 50 years. See, I had to keep, first I kept it all secret because if people knew what they were thinking, they'd lose their jobs. It was, so under lock and key, I kept it.
Right.
I had codes to identify these people and so on. And I